Hello, everyone. Christi Giannone back with Week 3 Multimedia Discussion Board for our MPA 545, Conflict Resolution and Labor Negotiations. So this presentation is taking a look specifically at mediation and the characteristics of mediators, what that looks like, why it's important, and the long-term effects. And so specifically, we took a look at the article by Landsberger, the final report on a research project in mediation. And so the aim of the project was to discover whether psychological tests were capable of measuring the traits which was desirable for mediators to have. So mediators are that third party. They're impartial. They have no power to impose a decision. They're there to guide the disputants and kind of what they're talking about. They're facilitating a mediation. So it's different than facilitation, but it's kind of hard to find another word because that's truly what they're doing. And so depending on the goal of what the mediation is, there's certain traits of a mediator that's going to help us to get there. So if they have that very directive style and the goal is reaching just an agreement, that's all they're really there for, you're going to need a certain type of mediator. But if you really need someone who's going to emphasize dialogue, relationship, and make that organizational change, then you're going to need different characteristics. And so what Landsberger was saying is that if we could give these tests to individuals before they become mediators, we could tell who's going to have a greater chance of doing that job well. And so specifically, we were looking at somebody, who can put more pressure on parties because they trust them. If you've got a city and union type of conflict where mediators coming in, and there's already probably a lot of pressure, something's happened, there's emotions there that we needed to bring a mediator in anyways. If they can find someone who's going to come in and build that trust to really feel like, that the mediator has both parties back, they're going to be able to put pressure on those parties to make a decision to move forward, to facilitate conversations that are going to get us in a space where we're actually making progress. And so, the results of Landsberger's research can be used to aid in the selection of mediators. So the textbook tells us that there's some core values and principles that a mediator should have: that impartiality, empathy, effectiveness as a questioner, the valued reputation, which is really important, confidentiality, process skills. And Landsberger's just built upon that. There's a couple other factors that he pointed out. Sense of humor, the ability to unobtrusively act in conflict. And so, having that, again, like we talked about, perception of being with both of those parties. And so it's important to look at the traits, and he wanted to find a way that we could maybe find those up front. So a cited article that I found that was referencing his work was The Effects of Perceived Ability and Impartiality of Mediators and Time Pressure on Negotiations. So this is from Brookmeyer and Sustrunk, and what it referenced specifically from Landsberger's research was the trait of a mediator's intelligence and how that makes them successful. And so what this paper studied was a simulated labor management negotiation, and they wanted to get empirical clarification on these presumed factors in negotiation literature. And the cool part about this is that's exactly what Landsberger wanted. He said in his research, hey, we need more research on this to see if it can be useful. And so the cool thing about Brookmeyer and Sustrunk is that's what it did. It supported Landsberger in showing that the perception of the mediator really affected the results. And so it showed that a mediator who had trust in the parties was able to yield, more money in the end, was able to yield higher results. And so it really supported the research that Landsberger did, and that these traits matter. And I think what I wanted to focus on specifically was that trust factor, that perceived trust that they're really there to help. And I think that's important because when you look at the goal of mediation, we're trying to get somewhere, and something happened where we needed a mediator. So depending on the strategy of how we're getting to that agreement, it's going to be important that we pick the right person. In my experience, when we've had to pick a mediator, we have what we call a strike list. So both parties get a list of mediators, and we get to strike which ones we don't want to use. The city side and the union side might be looking for different factors and traits. And so that's kind of one concept and way that we're trying to get to this person who's really going to help facilitate. And this has long-term effects. If we have a process where you've been going through this conflict that required a mediation, and then the mediator comes in and makes it worse, if they're really brash when we need someone that's going to have that softer dialogue, building relationship, building back the trust, it's going to continue to create an adversarial conflict type structure when we're trying to meet with any of our, unions, associations, labor type folks. And there's no trust there, and everything, there's a lot of different things that have impact and need negotiation and need meeting and conferring. And so to have this mediator's traits, that those skills is really important, because it can leave a blemish on the city, really, if it doesn't go well. So I think these factors that these researchers were talking about are truly important, and I think it's going to depend on maybe what your strategy is, your goal is. If this really is, we need this agreement now, then you might want someone who has a more directive style. But typically you're wanting someone that's going to foster more of a conversation. All right, thank you for listening to my presentation, and happy mediating.